I'm going to start this video off with a hot take that might just sound like I am saying something outrageous for the sake of saying something outrageous, but hopefully after we go through some numbers, you will at the very least see where I'm coming from. I think the primary reason why the Kansas City Chiefs are currently undefeated is because of Patrick Mahomes. Now, football is a team sport. Obviously, there's a lot of factors that have allowed the Chiefs to be undefeated, but I think even just saying something like that might seem crazy to a lot of people because I'm actually often seeing the exact opposite of that sentiment online. I'm seeing people saying that the Chiefs are winning in spite of Mahomes, and Mahomes has actually been a very poor quarterback this season. I've even heard people say, go as far as to say he's been a backup quality player this season. Why do I disagree so strongly? Well, let's get into some numbers. First, why is this perception even the case? Well, it's kind of obvious, which is you look at some points per game stats defensively. The Chiefs do have the edge there. These are the points per game stats this season, although I think you might be surprised at how okay the offense has done. 11th best points per game offensively. Last year they were 14th, but 5th best points per game on defense, and last year they were 2nd. So, yeah, definitely a defensive-minded team, right? So what am I even saying? But my real argument, I think, is that the reason why this team is so effective is because they are great at both offense and defense, or at the very least, very good at both offense and defense. Again, you might be saying, well, what are you talking about? 11th best offensively. Okay, that's solid, but that's not great. Here's a really interesting stat to go over. The average team in a Chiefs game gets 8.5 drives per game. This is well below league average, and in fact, this is the least amount of drives per game in the NFL for a team. So on average, their offense gets 8.5 possessions, and their defense has 8.5 possessions against them, right? The reason for this is because the Chiefs like to run long drives of their own, and also they tend to not give up the big play defensively, and so to beat them, you typically have to have a long drive of your own to defeat the Kansas City Chiefs. So because of that, drives are very down in those games. But who cares, right? Why does that matter towards anything? Well, it means that if you look at per drive stats, the Chiefs actually perform a lot better offensively than you might think. If you look at their per drive statistics, the Kansas City Chiefs run the 2nd most plays per drive in the NFL. They score the 7th most points per drive on offense, and then they give up the 13th, it actually should say least points per drive on defense. It's 13th best is the correct number there. So according to per drive statistics, their offense is actually a bigger deal in how they've been able to be successful this season than their defense. Both are quality, but one does have a pretty significant lead. The Chiefs-Raiders game from earlier this year, I think, can give you a good example of why maybe there might be a perception that this Chiefs defense is better than the offense is, even if that's not necessarily the case. So, in the Chiefs-Raiders game, the primary takeaway when the Chiefs won 27-20 was the defense played really well. That's what I heard people talking about. The Chiefs did have a nice goal line stand in that game, so that was the primary takeaway. But if you look at it, each team had 8 drives in that game, which again is very low for an NFL game. The Raiders scored 2.5 points per drive in that game. The Chiefs scored 3.375 points per drive, which is an absurdly high number. If you gave them just the average amount of drives in a typical game, the Chiefs would have scored 41 points. The Raiders would have scored 30 points. We would have looked at this as a dominant Patrick Mahomes game, but because of the way they're constructed and the fact that they tend to take a lot of time off the clock with each of their possessions, even if they're scoring at a 40-point per game pace, just due to the fact that they're going to take a lot of time off the clock, the game ends up looking closer. It's now just a 7-point game instead of an 11-point game. I think this is part of why they've been winning so many close games recently, is because of the fact that this happens, and because it kind of comes down to 1 or 2 possessions. When you do this, it's harder to get a 2-possession lead when you only have 8 possessions. It's easier when you have 14 possessions, right? That just logically makes sense. So that is my case for why I think the Chiefs offense is actually more important to this team than the Chiefs defense. You can feel free to agree or disagree. Hey, these videos are designed to start a conversation, not to end one, right? But that is only one half of the battle, right? The other half of the battle is Mahomes himself. Is he what's driving this Chiefs offense? And Part of me wants to kind of say, like, yeah, of course, like, he's what's driving the Chiefs offense. Do we even have to get into it? But we do have to get into it because some of the numbers are not overwhelmingly strong in Mahomes' favor. So you look at like the sort of crown jewel box score stat, which is passer rating. Mahomes' passer rating is just barely over 90, which isn't horrible. Again, even the box score stats aren't so bad that he looks like a terrible quarterback out there, if that's all you look at. But it's 17th in the league. It is not particularly great, but there are some things to note when you look at something like that. First, turnover-worthy play percentage, which is a stat you probably hear me bring up way too much if you watch a lot of my YouTube videos, but Patrick Mahomes is currently tied for 9th in the league for best turnover-worthy play rate. He's not putting the ball in harm's way too much, a little bit here and there. He's not like best in the league, but that's kind of where he's at. He's been a very good quarterback in terms of turnover-worthy play rate at protecting the football. The issue is that he's been unlucky. He's thrown 9 interceptions, which is tied for 4th in the NFL. Only Jordan Love, Geno Smith, and Sam Darnold have thrown more interceptions. They're all tied with 10. Also, Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff are tied for 9. So he's kind of right up there with the most interceptions in the league. That still doesn't affect his passer rating that much, though. It would bump him up a few spots to 13th, but he still wouldn't be top of the league. So even if you want to say, well, bad luck, it's not the end-all, be-all. In fact, if you look at PFF grades, I might have to just put this over my face because it would be too small to read otherwise, but you look at his PFF grades year in and year out, this is definitely a down season for him, according to PFF grades. He currently has an 83.4 total grade. His passing grade is down. It's the second lowest of his career as a starter, the worst being 2021, where he, of course, had that down season as well, when it seemed like there was a month stretch where he kept throwing interceptions and bad interceptions every week. Although I do want to mention, if you look over all the way to the right, the last number on this chart, turnover-worthy play rate, you see it's at 2.1%, which is actually tied for the best of his career. So the interceptions are fluky. That is going to come down, you would assume. There is an element of luck that comes into interceptions. It is what it is. So what is the takeaway then with all of this? My argument is simple. I think that with a mediocre receiving core, basically no left tackle this season for Kansas City, they've still been able to, they have pieces. Obviously, Travis Kelce's great. They do have some good offensive linemen as well. Even if they're better at run blocking than pass blocking, they still do have good offensive linemen. The Kansas City Chiefs are not a bad offensive unit, but there's no reason they should be top 10, and the reason why they are, in my opinion from watching the games, is Mahomes a lot of times doing things that aren't going to give you a ton of great statistics and aren't the flashiest plays, but doing a lot of little things that allow this offense to work and ultimately still be a very good offense. But I also think it's fair to say that, like, listen, they have gotten a little lucky with some of these games, right? A blocked field goal, that's going to help things. Of course, that has to be mentioned. And I would also say two things can be true. Mahomes can still be a really good quarterback and absolutely not be as bad as this season as people are mentioning or making it out to be, and also still be having a down season. I think that is what's happening. I think he has had a slight step back this year, but he's usually so good that even a slight step back is really helping contribute to the Chiefs team. I also think it's fair to say that, well, I would still say Mahomes is the number one contributing factor to the Chiefs being a competitive team this year, being undefeated. Forget competitive, being undefeated. He still is just one factor. And, like, I do think that while I would say Mahomes is probably the most important aspect of this team, even through these 9 games, the defense still is really important, right? Travis Kelce is still really important. Chris Jones is still really important. Andy Reid and this coaching staff are still really important, right? There's a lot of important things, but to pretend that Mahomes isn't a huge reason why the Chiefs are 9-0 is, I think, not really paying close attention to what's happening. But hey, that's just how I view it. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments below. I know it's going to be a bit of a hot take, so we'll see how this one goes over. But hey, I'm going to always say my opinion regardless of how popular it is. Those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.